Well, good morning and welcome to Talking Point here on WESN, the content capital. My name is Keaton Shah alongside Mr. Sean Michael Small this morning. Forgive me, it's Monday morning. I just said alongside.
Alongside?
Alongside,
well,
wow.
I mean, our local dialect and slang, I think people underestimate to the extent that it's shaped or molded by Scottish or English various slangs or
That has nothing to do with me saying alongside.
so but
I appreciate your.
It could be Irish, alongside.
But still, nevertheless, I appreciate
My co-host is alongside me.
Yeah? I appreciate you wanting to defend it. Thank you very much. Sean is up for hire if anybody needs an unqualified attorney at law.
Yep.
He's somebody who can certainly try and mediate action in your behalf.
I promise to be apolitical.
Yes, I think you will be. I suppose so.
Maybe.
Perhaps. Anyway, folks, welcome to Talking Point here on WESN. Sean, how was your weekend?
It was tiring, as most of my weekends are. Hopefully, folks, you got a bit more rest and relaxation than I did. However, it was 2 beautiful days. I will say it was 2 beautiful days. Unfortunately, when you're out in the sun, and I don't necessarily like to be out in the hot sun all that often. But it is what it is. It was 2 beautiful days in Caribbean. Not necessarily the best of days for everybody in the nation. We'll get into that later on with the ASP, our media ambassador from the TTPS. May the rate continues to keep it on rising. But we do have some other things to discuss, though. I think it is interesting to what extent is crime overshadowing everything else. Also, to what extent is the return of carnival festivities or fetting somewhat overshadowing the national consciousness of everything else?
Actually, I think somebody made the point last week, Friday, and that is, first of all, this weekend was a lot took place. Friday, Saturday, up to last night, the celebrations were continuing and obviously concluded. I think this morning is when it really concluded because people, a lot of students, university students, summer's break, so they are enjoying themselves.
Right.
But you're right, the consciousness of what's happening across Trinidad and Tobago. And let's be real, I mean, I think what it is, I've always stated before, in our position, we share our concerns and we share our thoughts. And I am honestly certain that people do feel the same way. However, I think there comes a point when you just grow fed up of opening the newspapers and reading the same thing over and over again that you stop taking it on. You expect the worst and you hope for the best. And I think that's what's happening at the same time. Like Trinidad and Tobago, after 2 years of a lockdown, for the most part of 2 years, trying to release now. Just trying to release that pent-up stress. And we have to be careful that we don't release too quickly, though.
Well, part of it is, I think, a lot of people are concerned that the release might actually be too quickly and too aggressively. But also, I think there is just the fact that we might be thinking that it's over. And if we're too reckless with how we release, or when I say reckless, maybe financially, we're so ready to exhale, we're ready to spend all our money on whatever we could spend it on, because there's so many things that we could not have done over the last 2.5 years or so that now it's available to us. And we already know that there are families in significant financial strain, and the situation that is pushing or driving that, or some of those situations, I should say, they're not necessarily over. So we do have a photo, if we could just show that on the screen. This was from last week, I believe, where the S&P, they've changed our credit rating. However, that has been, despite the fact that the finance minister here, he has more or less said, hey, we're heading in the right direction. That seems to be the government's message. Things are bad, we met things being bad, but we're heading in the right direction. This has been disputed by, I believe now, both economist Kevin Ramnarine, who hopefully he will be joining us shortly, as well as one of the opposition MPs.
Russian Parry.
Right, and their messaging I think this is unfortunately a splash of cold water, at least to some of us who are more concerned about the long term, because the long term direction for the country, you know, do you want to take out a loan I've heard that Carnival costumes are now $10,000. I think the irony, of course, is just like everything else, it's made abroad, so costs are going to go up if they have to, you know, order it from China and have it brought in.
The cost of a Carnival costume was never justified, Sean. Never ever justified.
It was justified because people were willing to pay for it.
Okay, to the extent that, fine, supply and demand, basic economic principle. Okay, you know what? We can charge $10,000 because people are going to purchase that. In these times, it's often said.
Well, I mean, we don't know that they're all $10,000. We heard that it was $10,000.
It's often said that Trinidad and Tobago does not have money, but Trinbagonians have money. Understand that. And if we're speaking on the Minister of Finance in relation to the Standard & Poor's rating of Trinidad and Tobago, our credit rating to be specific, he also, in a tweet a couple hours later, he said, several countries are close to economic collapse in the wake of the pandemic and the Ukraine war. Others are struggling in IMF programs. We have managed these economic challenges and emerged resilient and buoyant. Yet some of our brilliant economists told us to go to the IMF. Now, in all fairness to the minister, the first part of his tweet is not totally false. There are countries that are struggling in terms of their economy, some on the verge of collapse. Sri Lanka is probably the best example right now. When you take a couple of years ago, before this COVID-19 pandemic even happened, Greece was a perfect example of that taking place. Now, could we say that we have remained resilient? I suppose you can make the argument, yes, we have remained resilient. Are we buoyant? I am not so sure if that is the accurate term to use. Buoyant means we're actually still. You know, buoyant means we're actually floating. You know, we're actually keeping our heads above the water. And that, I think, is subjective. I do not think that most of our head is above the water. I think we are slowly sinking. I think there's opportunity for us to once more get out of this storm. I just believe that it's heading in the right direction, and I don't think so. Because our failure to actually try and look at opportunities. This is the thing. I'm not even saying that we have to do this, we have to do that. The mere fact that we've actually not looked at opportunities, and a prime example used last week, Friday, was using Caribbean Airlines and the airport as an economic hub. That's one example. I think that is where we're failing. Because for as long as we continue to cross our fingers, the Trinidad and Tobago was blessed simply by this windfall that we've received due to the Russia-Ukrainian war. We were lucky, but at the same time, it's a curse. Understand why. For as long as the revenue is coming from oil and gas, in this capacity, we're not going to move forward in any other sectors, in any other industries. We are going to continue to push energy.
I think at the end of the day, we had an advantage with regards to price of fuel. Price of fuel made flights. It's supposed to have made flights more attractive to come here because refueling was easier. I assume refueling for ships would have also been more cost effective. Have we become a business hub? No. Singapore is a perfect example. They have better ease of doing business. They have less corruption. They manage to get away with lower tax rates. And, oh, by the way, they don't depend on natural resources to fuel and drive their economy. Granted, not everybody could necessarily do what it is that they do. From, you know, it's not as though everybody could just do financial services and other things like that. But yes, it is a bit of a curse. Now, we're depending on the windfall from resources. We don't necessarily know when they're going to go away. The price of oil is slowly dropping, so it could happen. It's hard to predict these things, especially given the situations. There are other considerations in Ukraine. Even with the deal on the table with regards to the price of fuel, how well that will hold up, given the fact that at the end of the day, it started off, the whole emergency started off because of one nation being aggressive and arguably unreasonable. To say that an agreement will hold up while the war is continuing, that's not necessarily something. I mean, in that respect, the economic balance points of this war, engaging in economic trade with a nation at war with another nation, it's a very, very, I think, unprecedented situation globally. Meanwhile, yes, we're improving and we might be doing better than a lot of other nations. But I guess the problem is, you know, under the water is worse than just treading water. But both of them are not out of the water. So you could be relatively fine, but we could still be, you know, badly off. Or the results might not be good enough. It all depends. Do we think that the results are good enough? With regards to the cost of just living, basic necessities,
well, that's the thing.
I don't know.
That's the thing. You know, if we continue to utilize comparisons as our rating system, comparing Trinidad and Tobago's current economic situation to other countries and other nations, then it would always seem good. I have to admit, we are quite fortunate down here, regardless of how difficult things are.
There is that reality, right?
Right. But let's take a look at what the Minister of Finance did not address. Because S&P, in their outlook for Trinidad and Tobago, stated in their release, and I quote directly now, "The stable outlook indicates our view that Trinidad and Tobago will benefit from significantly higher energy and petrochemical prices, which will more than offset lower than expected energy production." Great. "We believe the higher prices will spur improved incomes and stronger revenue collection than previously anticipated, helping to stem the rise in government debt." And if you listen to that last part, helping to stem the rise in government debt, S&P is basically indicating that government debt is rising and has been rising. Because to what extent does the S&P rating help our debt to GDP ratio?
Here's the thing, right? We know that there's a deficit in the budget. We know that public sector workers have back pay and they're asking for a raise. We know that government is not paying some of their contracts, or state entities are unable to pay off some of their contracts for work being done. At times, for work commissioned by the government is not being paid to the companies that the government sets up to do that work. So then, of course, there's the loans. So all of these things are things that need money.
Don't forget the donations, by the way, during the COVID-19
Well,
pandemic.
I mean, donations are fine, but my point is, you know, you have the loans, you have the deficit, you have contracts not being paid, you have back pay. To what extent is there overlap? To what extent does the deficit account for some of these things? To what extent does it not? So when we add all of these things together, you know, what really and truly is the number that represents TNT being in the red? That is to say, money that we need to spend. We need it to spend it. Not things that we wish we could have, but to spend it on things that either we technically already purchased, or we already ordered, or we already had done, services already rendered, or loans that have to be repaid, or goods and products that have to be bought within the immediate future.
And this is the thing. You know, my final take on this, because I don't want to go too much. I'm not an expert by any means, and we would have an expert joining us hopefully very shortly. Straight up, that outlook by S&P again indicates stability. It's going to stem rising government debt. We're going to benefit from the windfall of higher energy prices that will hopefully actually make up for lower than expected production. And that is the issue there. As much as the Minister of Finance, and every right, will celebrate anything that indicates some sort of positivity. Remember that, Sean. Politics and the economy. Remember that. Mm-hmm. At the end of it all, you cannot celebrate luck. You cannot celebrate sheer luck. It's unfortunate what's taking place in Russia and Ukraine, or between Russia and Ukraine. And it has benefited TNT. It's hard actually stating that, but that's the reality of the situation. We can't celebrate that luck, because if energy prices did not rise to the extent that they did,
Exactly.
where would we be right now?
Exactly.
What would we be celebrating right now?
But more importantly, even with the energy windfall, we already know what the government is somewhat prioritizing, the back pay. But to what extent are the loans being repaid? To what extent are contractors who have money owed to them for the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, is that being paid? Then to what extent is the operating budget deficit, which is what I assume the deficit is mostly made up of, is that being paid? So
this is by no means a boom, and I do not want people to mistake this for a boom. That is where
this is luck allowing us to play catch up. Now, granted, the government has made its case that they were reducing the deficit over time, both the deficit that they inherited due to economic conditions in 2015, as well as the deficit of COVID. But at the end of the day, I think the messaging that they're doing now, trying to give us realistic expectations now, it would have been good if they started off that way, as well as to what you said. Don't try to just put every little positive spin you can. Be a bit more realistic. As you say, this is not a boom. This is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. This is not a reset that's going to solve all of our problems. They haven't necessarily connected all the details together to give us a true realistic representation of, hey, this is all the things we need money for that's owing. And this is how we're going to get it done.
And finally, they're not reducing, they're reducing the deficit. Not because of increased revenues, but of slashing in government expenditure. And understand how that works in economic terms.
Yeah, but how?
People, that's the thing. People are going to say, well, of course they're going to have to slash expenditure because we haven't had increased revenues. But what have we done to increase our revenues? They've had to slash government expenditure as part of austerity measures. And that is exactly what we're seeing, whether it be through the partial adjustment and the continued adjustment to the fuel subsidy, whether it be in education, whether it be in infrastructure, or whether it be in not, as you just mentioned, paying off debts that are increasing. This morning, my question is, since you mentioned contractors, what's the state of MTS? TSTT is one thing, WASA is another.
How much money government still owes TNTech?
Exactly. What is the state of MTS? EFCL, the ruling on that. We'll soon hear whether or not it was legal. But even in the High Court, if it is judged as illegal, what's going to happen then? They can't just restart EFCL. So that's where we are. That's where we are, Trinidad and Tobago. So hopefully very soon we'll get more commentary from an actual expert rather than just Sean and I analyzing the situation. So we're going to take a break here on the program now, and when we return, well, we'll continue the conversations this morning. Stay tuned.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you, what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through? Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Talking Point here on WESN, and we must apologize that there seems to be a delay this morning with our guest, Mr. Kevin Ramnarine, joining us. We hope that he will be with us soon. But in the meantime, the conversation goes on and continues. And sticking with the politics in Trinidad and Tobago, well, that's one way to introduce this topic. The Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago issued a response to Kamala Bissessa's call for a release of the transcripts of the meeting Friday before in relation to a no confidence motion in the Attorney General, Reginald Moore. Now, with all that being said, we're going to pause on that topic. We will get to that later on.
I'm waiting to say that I told the proverbial you so. However, we have an important discussion to get to right now.
Well, in the words of the opposition leader, what caused that sudden U-turn? Well, the U-turn in this instance is because now with us via the Zoom platform is economist and former Minister of Energy and Energy Affairs, Kevin Ramnarine. I'm not entirely sure if Mr. Ramnarine can hear us this morning. Hello, good morning, Mr. Ramnarine. Are you with us?
Hi, morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Ramnarine. Thank you very much for joining us on this program. My co-host and I, Sean, this morning, we were discussing the Minister of Finance, what seems to be a bit of a celebration in relation to Standard & Poor's credit rating of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, you had differing views when compared to the response of Minister of Finance Colin Imbert. Could you just elaborate a bit further on your opinion as to what this rating means for Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, first of all, how much time do we have?
We could go. Don't worry about that.
You go ahead, sir.
We could go. At least half an hour.
In my life, when I've studied when I was studying at the Lockjack School of Business, I had a very good lecturer there named Raja Hussain. And one of the things that he encouraged us to do was to read all the budget speeches and speeches of former ministers of finance. And one of the things that struck me is that George Chambers, who was the Prime Minister in the period 1981 to 1986, was always a person who defined reality and told people as it is. And he became very famous for some statements like "fet over, back to work," and stuff like that. Because he defined the reality of the economy in the early 80s. And this Minister of Finance certainly has not done that. In fact, people remember him crowing in 2018 that the energy sector, exact words, I don't want to misquote the gentleman at all. He came to the parliament in a ebullient manner and declared that the energy sector was booming and the economy had turned around and so on. And of course, the opposite was true. Our economy has not grown from 2016 to 2021, 6 consecutive years of negative economic growth or 6 consecutive years of contraction. And the history of the S&P credit rating for Trinidad and Tobago bears that out. So that when the Minister of Finance says that we've had the first positive revision in 15 years, you have to take that into the context of the fact that for most of those 15 years, our country had an A rating. So that, getting higher than A was pretty difficult. I think there's A++ or something like that. So it really is, to me, it was irrelevant, that comment, practically irrelevant or moot, as the lawyers would call it. And really and truly, when you look at the statistics say differently. The economy has contracted by an overall 17 to 18% in the period 2016 to 2021. Irrefutable. That data comes from the minister's own ministry, from the CSO and from the central bank. We are seeing where the inflation rate is creeping up. We are seeing where the unemployment rate is creeping up. And all this is being blamed on COVID. But interestingly, when I looked at the IMF database of 194, I think it is countries, and there was actually more than that, and I took out countries for which there was no data for 2021, such as Myanmar and Yemen and Syria and so on. We are we are just in a category of countries that 10%, 19 countries that did not have economic growth in 2021. By and large, everybody had economic growth most people had economic growth in 2021 because they were rebounding from COVID. Mm-hmm. And growth is measured year versus year. So you compare 2021 to 2020. And 2020 was a pretty bad year for everybody. So therefore, most people would have registered growth in 2021. We did not, according to the most recent CSO figures, which could be revised when the minister presents the budget in a few weeks' time, but I don't think by much. So to come and to celebrate the S&P moving us from BBB negative with negative outlook to BBB negative with positive outlook is really, grasping at straws. And the minister would do well to tell the country the truth. And I think the country would appreciate a definition of reality from the minister and a plan to tell the country how he intends to return the country to growth outside of Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of what we're seeing as the 8.4 billion excess revenue and so on is as a result of the war in Ukraine, which has pumped up commodity prices. Mm-hmm. So this is nothing to crow about. It's nothing to celebrate. I think the economy is in a very sensitive and precarious position.
Well, Mr. Ramnarai, the Prime Minister in his last presentation, he tried to make the case based off of what the Minister of Finance gave them at the retreat, presented to them at the retreat, that there were certain parts of the economy that had signs of improvement, as he would put it, with regards to the deficit being reduced despite the GDP shrinkage, with regards to our inflation rate not associated with what's going on internationally being relatively stable and what he would say was decent. Grading the government on a curve, do you think it's reasonable to do so? And even if in those areas they do get good marks, even with that, do you think people need to understand that the way how things are going, even with good management there's still areas of weakness that puts us in this precarious position that you were talking about?
Well, I want to be perfectly honest here this morning and forthright. I see somebody went onto your Facebook page and say, I hope he doesn't politicize the show. And I've never done that. Because we need to speak the truth. I would commend the Minister of Finance for one thing, and I would give him high marks for one thing. He was able to rein in expenditure. You would agree. He inherited an expenditure of somewhere in the region of 60 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars. Mm-hmm. And he's brought that down to somewhere in the region of the low 50s. And he's been able to do that not without some pain, but he's been able to rein in expenditure at a time when he had to, because revenues were not what they were when I was in government. So he's finally had a break. He got a break in 2022 because of Russia, Ukraine, commodity prices, and so on going up. So I would give him a good score for reining in and managing expenditure. And there are many people who believe that he was the only person who could do that, given his personality and given his experience. So I'm giving him a good score there. Where I think there is a deficiency is that we are not seeing the plan to grow the non-energy sector. If somebody was to ask you all, what is the plan to grow the non-energy sector? What is the plan to increase non-energy exports? There really is no coherent plan that somebody understands. So the energy sector is getting a bit of a reprieve because of high prices. But there too, there are underlying structural issues in the energy sector related to production. Production is, if you look at the most recent data from the Ministry of Energy, we are producing 2.6 billion cubic feet of gas per day, and that is the lowest gas production in 19 years. There will be some improvement in the second half of 2022. There might be some improvement in 2023, but it's not going to be anything to shout about. So the energy sector is not going to pull us out of the hole that we are in right now. And where I would say there's a deficit in this government, the current Rowley administration, is that we are not seeing that vision and that plan to grow this non-energy sector and to increase non-energy exports. So we have to find ways to earn US dollars other than exporting oil, gas, ammonia, and methanol. And that is where I think their major issue lies. So there's no dynamism in the economy. The local private sector is not excited about investing here. If you look around, you're not seeing the sort of investment that we would normally see from the major private sector houses and so on. You're seeing new groceries and new stores opening. That's an expansion of consumption. What you're not seeing is an expansion of non-energy production. We're not seeing the manufacturing sector, for example, expanding in Trinidad. So those would be some of my concerns. I know there's a budget coming soon. I don't know when Prime Minister says it's going to be an early budget. I don't know if that's an indication that there's going to be local government election when it is due, which I think is November, December. But there's always politics and economics in Trinidad are unfortunately intertwined. Mm-hmm. But I would just summarize by saying I would give the minister a good score for managing expenditure and reining in expenditure. But the pressures are beginning to build on him.
Well, Mr. Ramraj,
to release the purse strings.
Well, in relation to that, S&P's improvement of their rating, the rating doesn't really change as such more than it really improves. If we are crediting the Minister of Finance in relation to expenditure, at the same time, you've also mentioned we don't know what is our long-term plan, and we haven't been given a plan to grow beyond the energy sector here in Trinidad and Tobago. Then help me out here. I'm trying to understand exactly what is it that really allowed for this improvement in our credit rating. Is it the windfall, as we've been speaking about for the last couple of months, or is it something
very simply, very simply, a credit rating is a reflection of your ability or your ability to repay your debt. Mm-hmm. So if you have to lend money, if you have to lend money to somebody, and that person has a fantastic credit rating, you would be more inclined to lend them money, and you will lend them money at a lower interest rate, right? So if for example, if you go to the bank to borrow money, and the bank knows that you are a person who is credit worthy, you would easily get the money from the bank, and you'd also be charged a lower interest rate. So when the credit rating begins to slide, it's a reflection that in the opinion, and a credit rating is really an opinion of a credit rating agency of your capacity to repay your debt. So the very fact that, we've had an increase in revenue by $8.4 billion. And by the way, that still doesn't take us out of deficit. The deficit was somewhere in the region of 9 point something billion dollars. So the 8.4 just takes us close to plugging the hole in the deficit. So we either going to just balance the budget this year, or we're going to have a small deficit. So the credit rating agency obviously looks at your revenue position, looks at your main earners of foreign exchange and says, okay, they are in a slightly better position. So we revise the credit ratings, the outlook on the credit rating. And the terminology, negative and stable, are not reflective of the economy as much as it is reflective of the credit rating itself. So what S&P is saying is that BBB minus, which is now in brackets stable, is unlikely to slide lower in 2023, right? If we were BBB negative, what S&P would be saying is that we are likely to slide. But now we are BBB. We went from BBB negative to BBB positive in the space of 1 year. And that has a lot to do with the changing external conditions and I mean, the fact that, take for example, LNG, natural gas prices in Europe are at their highest ever. And recently they were as high as $40 per MMBTU. And people in Germany, and I don't want to get too geopolitical this morning, but I have a friend who lives in Germany, and he told me that people are buying these old time stoves that you put wood into.
Yeah.
And there's a little metal chimney that takes the exhaust out of your house. People in Germany are buying those things as a contingency in the event that Russia turns off the gas. Because we in Trinidad, we only have 2 seasons. It's either you're sweating or you're wet, so it rain. We have to appreciate that from the months of December to February, people could die if you don't have heat in the northern hemisphere, in places like Germany and so on. So that is, of course, affecting the price of gas. Trinidad does export gas to Europe. I understand that the ratio of gas going to Europe has increased. So the country is earning more money. Ammonia prices are $900 to $950 a ton. Just 2 years ago, they were like below 150. They were like about 150 per ton. So the ammonia plants will be paying more taxes. NGC will be earning more money and so on. So the overall position of the energy sector has been buoyed. There has been a return in demand generally in the economy in 2022. I think globally, there's been a return in demand for all things.
Yes.
So I could tell you flour consumption is up in Trinidad. And are people eating more flour? And the answer is yes. So there is a change. There's been a change in consumer behavior in Trinidad, whereas during the lockdown, during the restrictions, people were preparing food more at home. And there was less socialization, parties, and so on. It seems that flour consumption increases when you have, for example, if you have a fete. A lot of what is sold in a fete, gyros and burgers and hot dogs and so on, is flour related. So as we have more social events taking place, and you would agree that there are a lot of fetes taking place all over the country.
Yes.
Just drive through Port of Spain on a Sunday morning and you can see people coming home. So flour consumption is up. Demand in general is returning to the economy. So 2022 is a more positive year than 2021 and a more positive year than 2020. But overall, when we look at the whole picture of the economy over the last 6 or 7 years, it's not been a good one, and we've declined. And I'm sure both of you all have friends and family members who have migrated in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yes.
We all do. And it's a worrying pattern because we are losing people in their 30s, people in their 40s with, some of them multiple university degrees, paid for by Gate, paid for by the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago, and we're losing that intellectual capacity to the US and to Canada and to the UK. So that's a worrying sign, and it's a reflection of the state of the country, state of the economy that is not creating opportunity.
Well, Mr. Ramnarayan, I mean, I asked this to Dr. Hossain when we had him earlier, and again, it seems as though the government, they're very much betting on the energy sector, and as you said, we don't really see a plan for anything else. And just about every economist, I believe, that we've spoken to on this show has brought up two things that are linked together: diversification and food security. Now, I get it. We're not going to get that overnight, and it's not going to be cheap. But I have to ask, the oil and gas, the focus on it seems to give us short-term gain. Should we, to some extent, kind of sacrifice a little bit more in the short term to try to set ourselves up in the long term with food security and diversification? To what extent are we not really giving that balance, that ratio, the correct due?
So we've come into a windfall of $8.4 billion more than was expected. So what do we do with that money? Do we use that money for consumption, or do we use that money to stimulate production in the economy? Could that money be better used, for example, in building rural access roads, agricultural access roads for farmers? Could that money be better used in aiding the manufacturing sector to become more efficient? Could that money be better used in building manufacturing-based industrial parks and so on? So the $8.4 billion, and there probably will be more in 2023, should be used to stimulate that non-energy sector, to stimulate its production. We have, I think there's something happening in agriculture, and I don't know if you all picked up on it, but a lot of young, innovative people are going into agriculture. Have you all picked up on that?
Yes, for a while now, they've been both in Tobago and in Trinidad.
So and this is a good sign, a lot of young, bright, innovative people are going into agriculture, and we're seeing things like the dragon fruit. We're seeing young people going into cocoa, and we're seeing a plethora of local cocoa, local chocolate. A bit expensive, because I suppose they don't have the economies of scale as yet. But, we're seeing these positive signs in agriculture of young people getting into pepper sauce and dragon fruit.
Hydroponics.
And hydroponics. I have a student, one of my former students, he had lost his job in Point Lisas, and he set up a hydroponics farm using his engineering skills, right? Because, he took me to see the farm, and he showed me how his knowledge of how pumps work helped him to optimize the water flow, and he used a certain lighting and so on to get growth to take place at night, and he was supplying groceries and so on. So that is a positive sign, and I think that has to be encouraged, and perhaps Trinidad could reach a point where we not only feed ourselves, but we begin to export. So I think that the government has to look at how, or any government, this government or our next government has to look at how we use the energy sector revenues to stimulate the non-energy sector's growth and expansion. There is a fantastic opportunity, and I talk about it every single time I get a chance. To me, the best opportunity we have to diversify Trinidad is into maritime services. Mm-hmm. Trinidad's greatest asset is not oil and gas. Trinidad's greatest asset, you would say, well, of course, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the brilliant people of Trinidad and Tobago. But the Gulf of Paria is one of our greatest assets. It's one of the calmest pieces of water in the Caribbean and South America. It has natural deep water harbors, and there are artificial deep water harbors. We have to make better use of the Gulf of Paria. We have a maritime academy at Chaguaramas. We have hundreds of years of knowledge in the maritime sector. And given what's happening with the expansion of Guyana and Suriname, with the expansion of Brazil, and with possibly Venezuela coming back into some sort of normalcy in the next couple of years, there is a great opportunity. Trinidad should be the bunkering center of the Western Hemisphere. Trinidad should be the go-to place for refueling ships.
Yes.
Trinidad should be the go-to place for repairing ships. Trinidad should be the go-to place for yachties, but yet we see the reverse happening. We see the yachting industry in Chaguaramas is dying. So I see maritime, port and logistics as really where we have to go. And if I ever get the opportunity, and in the future, it's certainly something I will push as a top priority for the country, because there is the example is there are examples all over the world. Dubai, which we all admire and would like to be like. Dubai is really a port city that is based on a port called the Jebel Ali port.
Yes.
Right. So, and Dubai used to be an oil country like Trinidad. Right. So that for diversification, that is one area. And of course, agriculture, not only for diversification, but for national security. And I link agriculture to national security because food security is national security.
So, Mr. Ramnarine, just to clarify, two things. First of all, the ability of the government to repay its debt. Are we speaking solely of international debt repayment, or are we speaking about our local debt repayment, or is it a consolidation of both? Because in my mind, just as a citizen, I'm thinking, okay, this means loans that the government has taken and expenditure, but at the same time, I'm thinking about our local debt as well, money that we owe to contractors, money for outstanding government entities.
S&P will be mainly concerned with our ability to repay our international debt, right? International bondholders, international banks, and so on. So those will be the people who will be most interested in that credit rating. Trinidad and Tobago has never defaulted on debt, right? And I want to say I don't think we ever will. So that's a proud record that this country has had. However, our debt is climbing. And I don't have the absolute debt figure right now, but our debt to GDP ratio is somewhere about 85% of nominal GDP. So that is a concern, because eventually that reaches a point where it begins to become problematic. Many years ago, I read where the IMF had said 60% is reasonable. We are now at 85%, still better off than many countries in the CARICOM. I think out of the 14 or 15 CARICOM members, about 6 of them are in excess of 100% of GDP. But it is something to be cautious about. And a debt to GDP ratio is like, your blood sugar. If you're taking your blood sugar and, you're starting to see it creeping up, it's something to be concerned about.
Mm-hmm. Well, so just currently our debt to GDP ratio is 87.2%. That is according to the IMF. But also, this is what I don't understand, because you've basically analyzed S&P's rating a lot more than the Minister of Finance. I mean, the Minister of Finance is probably limited in the number of words that he can tweet, hence only releasing part of the information. But the rating agency said, and this is where I think people may be a bit confused or misguided. Let me use the term misguided. TNT's limited monetary policy flexibility and a heavily managed exchange rate constrain the country's ability to respond to potential future shocks in S&P's view. Our ratings also reflect poor long-term economic performance with per capita income growth that is below the average for sovereigns with similar income levels. That is absolutely terrifying when you think about it.
Yeah, so S&P is seeing so S&P, when they talk about rigid monetary policy and the exchange rate, they're talking about the fact that the exchange rate at $6.79 to the US dollar is not reflective of market conditions. And I know this is a very sensitive topic for Mr. Imbert because he has repeatedly said that he was advised to devalue. Certainly he wasn't, I don't know who advised him to devalue, but he keeps saying that people were clamoring for devaluation. He doesn't say who these people are. I certainly wasn't one of them. But we all know that the exchange rate 679 to the US dollar is not reflective of market conditions. And if you want to know what market conditions are, there are people who buy US for $7.50 to $8 in Trinidad and Tobago. There is a black market in Trinidad and Tobago, and that's basic economic theory. If you draw a supply-demand graph, you could show where the black market exists once price is not reflective of market conditions. So we have a problem with US dollars in Trinidad and Tobago. The minister has said his policy is not to devalue, and I think I want to be careful. And devaluation is not something which is, something that has to be thought out very carefully. There are advantages and disadvantages of devaluation. This Minister of Finance has resisted the devaluation. We've had devaluations back in the 1990s when Mr. Manning floated the dollar. We had devaluations in the 80s, 2 or 3 devaluations in the 80s between George Chambers and A.N.R. Robinson. Mr. Imbert has said his policy is not to devalue. There's sufficient US dollars in the foreign reserves, and if you want to go beyond that, there are US dollars in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, which could be used to prop up the foreign reserves. Because when Mr. Imbert draws down from the HSF, it draws down US dollars, and those US dollars are given to the central bank. The central bank puts it into the foreign reserves, and the central bank gives the Ministry of Finance TT dollars, because Trinidad and Tobago operates in TT dollars, and the Ministry of Finance pays salaries and pays for goods and services in TT dollars. So you cannot divorce the HSF from the foreign reserves. I know there's some people who will disagree with me on that, but I just gave you how the relationship works. So we will continue to see a slide in our foreign reserves, because what the central bank is putting into the economy, what the banks are selling to the public, is not being replaced by equivalent amounts. And I use the analogy of a bucket by a standpipe. I like to use simple analogies. Imagine you have a bucket hanging from a standpipe, and there's a hole at the bottom of the bucket, and the standpipe is dripping, but the hole is bleeding the bucket faster than the standpipe is replenishing the bucket. That is our foreign reserve position for the last 6 years. So we've gone from around, I think it is 10 point something billion when the UNC left office, to now about 6.7 billion. Mr. Imbert has also been putting the US dollar borrowings into, not Mr. Imbert, the central bank. So when the Minister of Finance raises bonds internationally, he raised about $1.5 billion US in bonds, that goes into the foreign reserves. The IMF special drawing rights that were distributed last year, August, to help countries through the COVID, 600 to 700 million US, that went into the foreign reserves. So we've been drawing down the foreign reserve faster than the energy sector has been replenishing it. There might be some reprieve in 2022, but the long-term trend is downward. And at some point in time, that is going to reach a point where we have to have an intervention. Well, so that, I mean, eventually, if you use the analogy of a human being, eventually, if you continue to not take care of your body, at some point in time, you're going to have organ failure, or you're going to have the need for open heart surgery. That is not upon us at this point in time, because we have over $10 billion in foreign exchange, but the long-term trend is downward. And it may happen in 2026, 2027, but if we don't change course, it is going to come upon us.
Well, I have to ask, because some of these problems seem to be outside of the control of anybody in TNT because it's all external. To some extent, do we really have levers that we could pull? Do we really have measures that we could take? Or is, at least, if not all of it, some of it inevitable? Some of the backlash, some of the economy contraction, and are we going to just, we could delay it, but do we really have a chance to stop the economy sliding?
Well, yeah, so we have to find ways to earn foreign exchange beyond oil and gas. You know, when you strip all the technical economic discussion apart, it really boils down to your ability to earn US dollars, because US dollars is what we need to have to trade with the world and to buy pharmaceuticals, to buy cars, to buy everything that we use. I mean, just look around your physical environment right now. Every single thing is imported. So we have to find ways to earn more US dollars on the one hand, and on the other hand, conserve US dollars. So one way to conserve US dollars is not to spend so much US dollars importing food. And that again comes back to agriculture and our ability to put food on the table that is grown in Trinidad and Tobago or even within CARICOM. Are there things that we are importing from outside of CARICOM that could be sourced within CARICOM? Yeah, Guyana is already supplying Trinidad with most of its rice, if not all the rice. Guyana is supplying Trinidad with sugar. Is there more stuff we could get? So, but the point is that the slide is certainly there. The decline in the foreign reserves has been now happening for the last 6 or 7 years. I don't see that changing. You will get some reprieve in 2022. But one of the things too is that we've also curtailed our appetite for foreign exchange in Trinidad because it's so difficult to get. So around 2014, 2015, sales of foreign exchange to the public was about $7 billion. Sales of foreign exchange to the public now is about $4.5 billion. These are rough figures. So it means that the public, and by the public I mean me, you, Mr. Sabga, Mr. Nila Masi, Mr. Standard, Mr. Quartz, Mr. PriceSmart, they are purchasing less US dollars from the commercial banks. So you ask yourself the question, why is that? And it's because the economy has contracted, demand has fallen generally over the last 5 or 6 years. So we've been able to rein in the foreign exchange appetite by dropping demand, but it's the long-term trend has set in.
Well, Mr. Ramnarayan, I want to thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, it's top of the hour now, and thanks very much, guys. Very stimulating as usual.
Yeah, and we appreciate you joining us.
Look forward to talking to you all during the budget or during Mr. Imbert's explanation of the state of the economy, which is that the 2nd of August or the 2nd of September?
September.
Yeah. Okay.
But I can tell you one time, Mr. Ramnarayan, over the course of the next month, we will be analyzing budget 2021-2022, going into budget 2022-2023. So thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thanks, guys. All the best.
All the best. Mr. Kevin Ramnarayan there joining us this morning to get a better understanding of S&P's ratings of Trinidad and Tobago. And again, let us point out the fact that, again, you know, it may be the Minister of Finance, not his fault. Twitter does limit the amount that you can type, but he didn't obviously give us the entire story.
There are other ways.
I suppose.
The government knows and has the ability.
I guess so. Do they?
They have a whole media house, if necessary. They have multiple YouTube channels,
which they have used
before. They have a Minister of Communications, which is technically an entity separate to the media house. They also have a political party that has its own communication apparatus, which they do not utilize. They have channels.
And we have channels as well here on Talking Point, because now we go for news on the hour, and when we return, well, we open up the phone lines this morning. Stay tuned.
is your WESN News on the Hour. I am Denise Sinclair. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. Opposition MP says declaring crime a public health emergency is useless. 3 more murders recorded over the weekend. Over 400 men diagnosed with high blood pressure out of 576 at recent health initiative. And internationally, Japan on high alert as volcano erupts. Now for the details. Opposition MP Rodney Charles is of the belief that the declaration of crime as a public health emergency does nothing for the country. This, as he says, serious crime remain prevalent.
How will this approach succeed when thousands of students will enter secondary schools in September totally unprepared to succeed? When hundreds of Venezuelan migrant youths are not integrated into our society? When poverty is increasing daily, while guns are readily available, when income inequality is rising.
Well, the murder toll rose again with the latest killing of a man in Enterprise, Shikwanas. Reports say that 18-year-old Sherrod Richards was walking along Tobago Road Extension just before 10 p.m. when he was gunned down in a drive-by. The assailants fled the scene and Richards succumbed to his injuries. Meanwhile, on Saturday in San Juan, one man is dead after 3 persons were shot at by gunmen. Reports say 37-year-old Roger Williams died at the scene. Also on Saturday, a man was shot and killed in his vehicle on the Southern Main Road near Prance Gardens in Claxton Bay. Investigations into all these incidents are ongoing. 460 men have been diagnosed with high blood pressure at NCRHA's recent checkup initiative. This was revealed at the 3rd installment of the North Central Regional Health Authority's Men Wellness Initiative. Almost 600 men were in attendance. The Health Outreach Initiative, which originally commenced in 2019, forms part of the NCRHA's thrust to combat the rise in NCDs by providing preventative medical interventions to the public through these special primary care projects. In international news now, Japan's Sakurajima volcano, located on the island of Kyushu, erupted on Sunday, prompting evacuations in the region. The Japan Meteorological Agency said the volcano erupted around 8:05 p.m. Footage from the agency's surveillance camera showed a cloud of smoke or ash rising from the volcano. JMA announced a level 5 alert, the highest level, calling for people to evacuate. There were no immediate reports of damage or casualties. Well, that was your news to the hour on WESN. I am Denise Sinclair. Thanks for watching.
Organic Ocho candy. What's inside counts.
Let your voice be heard. Call Madam Fix It on WESN, the only place that effectively helps you with your woes. Having problems getting onto government agencies, water woes, NIS and pension problems, potholes, and much, much more. Call me, Madam Fix It, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right here on WESN. Let me fix it for you.
Is it politics? What is it? Is it that nobody cares about sport?
The kind of support that sport used to get in the past is no longer here.
The thing is, taking a knee doesn't mean that that's the only thing you're doing now, Andrew.
Right.
Taking a knee along with other stuff.
Samantha, what are you looking forward to when you return home to Trinidad and Tobago after winning the title?
Thank you very much for speaking it into existence.
Is it no pressure on Nicholas Paul?
It makes me more motivated to work hard and to go out there and rep the red, white and black.
Why are we sending a team to the Winter Olympics?
There are a number of Trinbagonians who are in the diaspora and have grown up in winter sport. It's an opportunity that the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee will not close the door on.
I also believe in the players that we have. Once you can motivate the players, you can get the best out of them.
Welcome back to WESN here. The content capsule talking point returns, and as we continue these discussions this morning, before we open up the phone lines, let us introduce alongside Mr. Sean Michael Small and myself this morning, Acting ASP Ashraf Ali. You know, sir, forgive us for the delayed introduction, but we are glad that you've stayed with us and have made time to continue the conversations with the TTPS and the public.
Thanks very much, and it's good to be here again.
Well, crime notwithstanding, you know, the FET season is more or less seems to be going in full swing. We're going now into, well, summer is near the halfway point, you could say, the vacation period. Then we're going to go into Christmas and Carnival, and you told me off air when we were talking that that's when the TTPS has to now ramp things back up. With that, though, recently there's been, you know, claims thrown out by FET promoters that they don't necessarily like how the TTPS or how the superintendents conduct business of the police going towards FETs. And I think there's a lot of, to some extent, misunderstandings of what it entails that the public might have, as well as to, you know, what to do when there's a breakdown of the system.
Yeah, so I'm aware of the article that was published. This always continue to be an issue for us in that we have both the promoters or applicants of these events and the final decision with the police. There's always some discussions as to whether or not there's appropriate strength or not. In the police service, we have a standard procedure in that how we adopt investigating these events. Once someone goes to the court and apply for two particular type of license, we call occasional dancehall license. That's when you're having a FET and you're having music being played and all of that. And then we have occasional bar license, which are special event. These are special events license. The court would send it to the police for investigation. This is where we start our investigation. And there's a whole list of things that we look at when we're looking at an event. First of all, begin with we will interview with the applicant and inquire what type of event you're having. Whether a sporting event, public event, all-inclusive, like these FETs, number of persons that you have is expected to attend, whether alcohol will be sold, if it's an all-inclusive, alcohol being offered in event, which we know that alcohol will be offered in event, ticket sales at the entry points, or is it online tickets and prepaid tickets, and if it is a bar that you're collecting cash for at the event, how many bars you have in it and how many points of entry that you're looking for cash. Those are specific to the event. Then we also have the issue of parking arrangements. There are no facility, ideally in Trinidad and Tobago, where host events where we have sufficient parking for any of these events, with the exception of the Brian Lara at this point in time, that could take a large amount of crowd and parking facility at that event. Queen's Park Savannah, to some extent, has a number of parking available, but may not be sufficient for everybody. So generally, when we have events, persons use the public streets. And this is where we have the challenge, where it causes problem, because we have the issue of the crime also taking place, where persons will take the opportunity now, because these are opportunities of crime, where we have persons we have lasting motor vehicle, we have people going into the vehicles, breaking into the vehicles, then your persons who leave in and come into the event may end up getting robbed dependent on the location that you park your vehicles.
Well, one of the things that the article brought up was with regards to payment. And I think some of the things, I don't know if the article makes it clear, but it's a combination of officers don't work for FET promoters, and the payment is supposed to not necessarily do what the article said with regards to the old-time cash system.
Right. So the system is that we don't determine that strength automatically. When you go before the court will make a recommendation to the court. The court, having listened to the police as well as the FET promoters, they also have the opportunity to put their argument forward whether or not the strength is sufficient or it's too much. The court makes a final decision, and that final decision is where we have to abide by. When the court makes the final decision, in order for the FET promoter to get their license, they have to pay their monies in advance and show proof that they paid. That all said and done. They don't pay cash to police. They pay through our system where we have where you go and you pay the money into the bank with a check. Right? The police service has set up an established procedure that because this amount of money that we have, you don't want you coming and paying cash, because cash tend to cause a lot of problems in changing hand to hand. We have some issues with that. So the money you go to pay into the bank, the senior officers will now go to the bank and take out the appropriate amount of money for payment of the extra duty. So how the article brought it across is that police collecting money in hand. It is not police getting paid immediately like that. Hey, take a $1,000 extra to work. It doesn't happen like that. Whatever you work for, the amount of hours that you work for, that is what you get paid. And we also have taxes that we pay.
And if that happens, that technically is the illegal way. That's not condoned.
Exactly, and it's not condoned by the police service.
Very quickly, let me ask you, who determines the number of police officers required for FET, and who determines the breakdown of payment required in order for those police officers to attend an event?
Right, so the police after doing the investigation or we call the risk assessment for the event, taking into consideration all these factors for this event, we recommend a strength for public safety and security of the event. And the event we consider the event both internal and external aspects of the event. So that is the event. We manage the entire event, and we recommend a strength for managing that entire event.
But is there a ratio?
There is no specific ratio in Trinidad and Tobago. However, jurisdictions across the world, they use different type of ratios. For example, some jurisdictions, law enforcement across the world, they may use 50 patrons that may require 1 police officer to manage that event. But this is where it gets more interesting, in that there are considerations for that 50. So if it's alcohol being sold, nature of the event, location of the event, then this 50 to 1 starts to increase. And as it starts to increase, it is dependent on the size of the crowd, the nature of the crowd, what the event is taking place. And in Trinidad and Tobago, we have something similar to that, in that when we have 3 or 4 constables working in an event, we add a supervisor. So that is where our corporal comes in. So that's why somebody will get a 1 corporal, 3 constables, because we have a level of supervision for this event. Somebody has to be responsible for the event. And as the crowd increases and the number of officers increases based on our supervision structure, you may end up with a sergeant, because you may end up with 10 constables, so then you might have to add in additional corporals, so you have supervision across the board. And then when you have more than 4 or 5 corporals, you will end up in a sergeant, because you have overall supervision. As the number start to increase in policing, police officers, so to the level of supervision.
And then finally, one of the things, of course, is when not enough, because you're essentially paying for X number of officers and you have to pay in advance. So when not enough officers show up, there is an avenue of recourse for FET promoters to get back some of the money.
Right, and so the promoters now, after the event, the promoters would come back, or the applicant, when you use the word applicant, because this is not about a FET event or any event that somebody apply for is an applicant, right? So it could be a road duty that somebody is doing some work home and asks for some police officer, like a wedding, persons come and ask for police for the wedding to help manage the crowd at the wedding because of the location. So any event It falls into that category. So the applicant now, after the event, they are required to come back to the police station, and if the number of officers that they were required to pay for didn't come, they have a refund to get. Now, on the flip side to this, is that some of the applicants and some of the FET promoters, specifically FET promoters, are not truthful to the amount of tickets and the amount of patrons coming to the event. Because they, for example, they may come and say they have 500, but they would sell more than 500 tickets, or 2,000. Sometimes I go beyond that, sometimes 300 or 400 extra. The crowd capacity increases. So then the management of that crowd capacity, we may have police officers to manage, because we cater for police officers for public safety and security managing 500 persons. When you add in additional persons into it, in additional patrons, you are depleting the strength and the ability for the police to effectively manage that event with additional person, because you was untruthful and it was misleading when we interviewed you. You told us the wrong thing. So we would go for the court based on what you told us. And then we have the other side to it now. Now, if it is that you have 500 persons and your event is 500, and your event was not as successful as it is, we can't anticipate that. We are not event promoters. We do not know what is your advertisement and patrons coming. So if it is that you only had 300, they expect that they just come back and say, well, only 300 people that come to the event, we need to get a refund. It doesn't work that way.
But what we saw Friday, Saturday, and Sunday over the weekend, and we are going to see more of this taking place. We understand that the TTPS has SRP, Special Reserve Officers, that are on standby. But in the event of crowds, major crowds, if the TTPS does not have the manpower, because you're taking away officers, let's say, from their duties or responsibilities that they should be overseeing at police stations or patrols, whatever it may be, an event does not get the clearance to go ahead. I'm assuming that is the case.
No. We cannot go before the court and say that we do not have the manpower to manage this event, and we can't stop the event. The court makes a decision based on several different factors. However, there's a misconception that extra duty and overtime is the same. It's two different things. Overtime is extra hours performed on actual duty. So I am on duty today, and I'm supposed to finish, and I'm rostered until tonight. The extra hours that I make during the time that I'm being rostered for duty considered to be overtime in excess of 40 hours that I make for the week, right? Extra duty is duty given to officers who are not on roster duty. So you cannot be on duty and perform an extra duty. So these are the officers you call out and who are available, who are not rostered for duty on that particular day. They may be on leave, they may be on vacation leave, or what you call, they are called in to perform this specific duty. So the issue of not being able to manage the event is null and void with respect to manpower, because the manpower is not used by the current officers who are working. It is persons who are called in to do these extra duty, and you are not on rostered duty. So that is additional hours, that is officers who are not on active duty coming out to do this duty.
And do officers have to be there? Police officers have to be at FET, so could private security firms be utilized instead?
Right, so private security has their roles and responsibility for the event, as well as police. Police officers are there for public safety and security, not private security. You're not paying police as a private security.
They're not security for the FET promoter
right.
and his profits.
There's some misconception that when you pay for police officers stand by the gate and see which patron to come in and which patron can't come in. That is not our responsibility. The private security and the FET promoters, they are the ones who issue the tickets. Those are the ones who come in to patronize. Those are the ones who can deny entry to your event, not the police. If they are denying entry, then the police will now step in and say, listen, Mr. Small, you cannot enter the venue. The promoter say that your ticket is not valid. Right? At that point in time, it becomes a police issue where you are not allowed to enter the venue because of your your ticket in that circumstance.
So if we're speaking about policing and FETs, does the TTPS has plans to implement, let's say when a FET is over and the exits, breathalyzer stations for patrons before entering their vehicles as a proactive measure for preventing road fatalities?
Yes, and we have partnered with several of the FET promoters and offered that service free of charge. Note, that is not extra duty, that is part of our mandate to ensure that public safety and security after the event is maintained. So they would just indicate to us that, okay, they would like a station be set up where it is free of charge, that persons will get free breathalyzer, and the persons will now understand that whether or not they should drive or shouldn't drive.
And if you're doing that free of charge, what has been the response of the promoters in relation to that service that you're offering?
We have been getting some good reviews, and a lot of persons would take the opportunity to, in some situations, to take that opportunity. But at the end of the day, it's cost effective to it's costly to the police service, because we have to provide now these additional tools with all the devices as well as the manpower that the police service is going to pay on the taking the brunt of the cost, because this is our public community corporate enterprise relationship. We want to ensure that it's happening.
But even if you're offering this free of charge, and let's just say all promoters agree, okay, we want this, you're offering this free of charge, you're saying it's a cost. Instead of just offering it as a service, shouldn't the police proactively implement this as mandatory rather than just say, okay, we're offering this to you?
Right, so it's two approaches. We give it as an offer that they can utilize this and sell it to the patrons for ensuring that we have some level of control with the persons who not too sure if they had sufficient alcohol or too much that they could drive. And then we have it on the enforcement, because this time there's not no enforcement here. This is just you taking the opportunity to determine where your alcohol level, right? Now we have the enforcement that we set up on the peripheries of all these events, on the highways after these events, where if you choose to drive under the influence of alcohol, you are subjected to the court of law. And then you may get a ticket and be arrested and charged here. So you have an opportunity now at the event to consider whether you should take a little half an hour first before you go on the road. But if you should go on the road now and refuse that, we will enforce the law on that. So we do in fact have those preventatives after event activities like breathalyzer check, road checks, all of that after these major events.
Just to switch gears now, because, you know, talking about breathalyzer and people being too inebriated to drive home. Now, we're more or less at the band launch season, so we know what that means. Carnival, more or less, if things go as we expect it to go, we're sort of expecting a lot of FETs between now and next year Carnival. That's more or less been the trend before COVID. We're talking about half the year, FET after FET after FET. One might argue too many FETs. Since everybody is still kind of coming out after being denied this amount of entertainment, is there any concern from the TTPS that there will be a greater surge than normal with people trying to, they're hasty to want to unwind and to let go and release?
Yes, that is always a concern. If you check 2018, 2019, when you look at the calendar of events that was published through all the social media platforms, when you check the type of events that was taking place leading up to Carnival, in the last 3 months leading up to Carnival, up to Carnival Sunday, night before Carnival, we had almost 148 events taking place throughout Trinidad and Tobago in about 3 months' time. That's a lot of events. We're not talking NCC oriented events.
Just private.
We're talking private events together with NCC Carnival events. That's a lot of events that police has to manage, and it varies from boat rides to all-inclusives to juve fetes, small juve fetes in different communities. It's a wide range of events that are taking place. We had some events taking place in the West, where we have a lot of challenge in the West, because as you all know, that is one way in, one way out in the West. There's only one road.
Yeah.
Where you have multiple venues in the West having their event on the same day but at different times. But the crowd anticipates, and you have a large influx of the crowd coming in and traffic coming in, as well as persons would go on the beaches and enter the crowd for the beach is also there. So we have about 3 different type of crowds for these events, right? So it is not about when promoters talk about the number of police officers, we don't consider the number of police officers only. We consider the public safety and security of that event and the effect it having in the immediate surroundings and communities.
Well, I have to ask, because, you know, crime, we don't know if it's going to stop just the Fed. You know, sometimes it seems as though, yeah, it might actually take a pause just for a Fed. Other times it will follow the Fed. So is there any concern, not only, well, fetting and the desire for funds to go to these events drive crime, but also that perhaps if the TTPS has too many requests on their manpower, could it possibly affect enforcement in other areas?
It will. It will, because at some point in time, the number of police officers at an event is not, because, so an example, the event will finish, and I'm going to give you the example, we can use the example, live example, the one at Brian Lara, where the event ended sometime in the morning. And on the way, the patrons, there was a shooting on the highway.
Right.
So the event finished. The officers that worked the event finished. But it happened at another location where it now extends the reach of the police service now. So we have other officers from other areas and other resources we have to implement for this. So yes, it's not the event alone, right? Because stations and divisions now have to implement additional patrols and additional resources to be pulled out to manage these events that are happening at a particular location, because the fallout and the after effects of this event is what we have to look at, right? So an event finished 2 o'clock in the morning. When it finished 2 o'clock in the morning over a weekend, a portion of that crowd still wants the feds to go down to the avenue. So the avenue now starts to get an influx. And when the avenue should close off at a particular time, we have patrons coming to the avenue, so they keep on, the businesses want to get their additional funding, so they keep on opening longer and longer because we have that. So we have crowd from here levitating towards where the
and that's when you see police just happen to show up on the avenue.
Yes, so we have to pull resources from the different divisions in the police station district in Port of Spain and send them to the avenue because they listen. And that is not extra duty, because that's become general duties now, because we have an increase in activities in a particular area. So there's a lot of dynamics with respect to this. It is not as simple as what was mentioned in the article. The article is a bit misleading in the way that it is brought across. Right?
Well, sir, I want to thank you very much. I mean, that's really it for time this morning. I hope with all these fets and events taking place and the police service having to carry out their duty, it doesn't take away from the investigations associated with murders and other crimes across Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, we've had, I think, 4 more murders over the weekend.
Yeah, but you know, to what extent are these murders by hardened criminals or crimes of opportunity? I mean, that question is also hanging over our heads, and we'll discuss with the ASP at a later date.
Yes, but thank you very much, Acting ASP Ashraf Ali. Always a pleasure having you on the program, and we're looking forward to next week.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here.
And, well, say if you watched that West Indies versus India game yesterday, I know that you probably didn't have too much of a good Sunday. It wasn't a bad game, but you know.
Well, I just say there's a lot of spins in cricket. So, unfortunately, I mean, it's a young team, and I would hope that our captain and our team give a better show on the next occasion. But it's a learning curve. But really and truly, when you look at the amount of runs that we have to go, 300 plus is a lot for. And we did
for this West Indian.
We did well. We did well.
Yeah.
So
there were a lot of positives, sir.
Yeah.
Just a little heart-aching.
It had.
I think Andre is going to have a crowd with us for taking some of his show.
No, don't worry. I'm pretty sure Andre might invite us to speak.
Well, that's me too. I'm not a cricket guy.
Well, Acting ASP, thank you very much. Sean Michael Small, that's it for Talking Points. Another day. We didn't have phone calls this morning. We do apologize, but that's just sometimes how the cookie crumbles, as one individual might see it. But I'm Keaton Shaw. This has been Talking Point. Remember, today is a good day to have a good day. And, well, all of us here at the station wish you a great day ahead. And we'll see you again tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.